So good afternoon, everybody. I am Anto Budierjo. This is Monday Live, something we do every Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Basically to have a chit chat and discuss the future of smart buildings. The panelists, the profiles of the panelists are listed on Monday Live if you were interested in knowing about us. Just a reminder that the views here expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and chat on the tools, on the chat tool and the Q&A tool. I see this chats going on as I speak. Please complete the survey at the end, and just a reminder, this slide deck that I'm showing is on mondaylive.org itself. If you want any of the links that we're showing on there. So just a reminder, the focus of February, which we're coming to an end, is the journey from smart to autonomous buildings. That's a proposition that we're kind of floating there to get your reaction. And this is the agenda today. We're just going to have a general chit chat, and then we'll focus on the role of digital twins and how that fits into autonomous buildings. A lot of sort of discussions beyond after that. Some slides from the team here. Ken Sinclair, I'm sure will talk about what he's focused on in February going on to March. John is talking about, I haven't actually looked at this. I'll have him recount that. Anna's going to be talking about digital twins. So you must know a thing or two about digital twins.
Famous author.
Famous, yes. Mark is talking about automation in general. This looks interesting article from McKinsey. And Roger is talking about CRE managers. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. So, before we bring everybody back on, just not a reminder, this is new. This is news to you. Next month, starting from next week, our topic will be sustainability, the role of smart buildings or autonomous buildings in sustainability. So that should be a really good month of lots of discussions around that topic. So with that, I'm going to bring back the team, and who wants to start?
I'll go, because it's always ladies first, and so our March article is about the amazing women in our industry, and I too did not realize how amazing they all are, but my God, I've been overcome with amazing articles and different takes on our industry. So it's going to be an extremely informative issue. The theme, of course, of the Women's Day is that the challenge choose to challenge, and of course with challenging people comes change, and the connection is something that's on the women's minds as well. Some great articles about how to invite more women into our industry. We can invite them from the universities, we can invite them from within. I think was one of the messages that was quite clear, is that we actually have within our industry a whole bunch of folks that talk funny like we do, and we can actually catapult them into helping us and bringing in completely different ideas. I think with COVID, the whole building industry has turned much more touchy-feely than it has been in the past, run by men, and women will be a great asset to us. So we've got some great articles there. They are truly on fire. Wait till you read the issue.
It's great to hear. It's great to hear. John, do you want to chime in?
So I put those in because they tie into themes we've talked about. The first one there is, a large portion of society is not going to go back to the jobs they had. So there's a real need for retraining and people to find new jobs. Of course, that was the theme we talked about a lot in January. So I thought that was interesting. And then in the daily, weekly, monthly quest to try to figure out what's going to happen to the commercial real estate market, always looking for these articles that say it's going to resurge, it's going to collapse, and I post them so everybody can see the divergence of views. But you see a couple of actually two on the negative side, if you will. One, WeWork reducing their prices notably, and the other, the Fed warning about a concern over the debt situation associated with commercial real estate and how it'll be refinanced. So,
Anno.
That link is an article that Therese and I wrote, 4 years ago, Therese, on introduction of the digital twin. You're on mute, Therese. Just sort of our perspective of, what we thought the digital twin meant as far as building technologies. What was its mission? Had a kind of a big bent to openness, right? We were kind of highly focused on it, making sure that was open, flexible. Our concern was, digital twins would become a closed environment again, and concerned about that open provides the ability for new thinkers, new generation of people to think about data. And if we have the data in a place that was accessible and flexible, right? So that was a key criteria of our discussion that we're talking about at the time, right, Therese?
Yes,
So.
you were the brains. I was only the fingers. But I think what I remember from it, my big takeaway is like that it was operational data that would really make something that's pretty static, and at least I've never worked hands-on in that industry, but BIM has seemed like the gangly, large, geometrically focused kind of technology that has adapted. But if you add the operational technology, the real-time data, that was like, your metaphor was like, it's breathing life into the digital twin. And I still believe that. I think that was a great way to put it.
It'd be interesting to compare those views with when we talk about it with John Turner in a little while.
Yeah.
Great. Mark?
So I posted this. I thought it was kind of interesting. It's something that McKinsey just put out entitled The Imperative for Automation Success. And while it's general, I think if you look at this within our industry, there's a lot of things that I think really go with the state of our industry and so forth and so on. So for example, about increasing the use and embracing technologies such as AI and data and things like that, which I thought was good. And the fact that automation in general is increasing instead of decreasing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, COVID is one. But two, I think we're in a position, same within our industry again, where we've seen the industry move from pilots to real world deployments and so forth and so on. And to sum up, 3 key areas that McKinsey brought up that I think speaks exactly to our industry is 1, make automation a strategic priority. 2, focus on the people as much as the technology. And I think that right now today with health and wellness and all that, that speaks volumes right there. And then the last one is develop an operating model that enables scalability. So I think those 3 apply extremely well to what we all do.
That's great. And I think that will come into our conversation about digital twins and stuff. Roger, you put up some CRE numbers.
Yeah, I think it was, it's a positive story really about saying that really that CRE managers are, beginning to have a greater influence on some of the strategic decisions because the buildings people are living in and are going to be living in will influence what's going on and have a little bit to a little bit of Mark saying with well-being and things, that they are now having more influence than they ever did before. 86% is showed there. Obviously, budgetary limitations are the main challenge, as ever. I don't really see that as any different. But the other interesting fact I thought was that 92% of the people surveyed, this was done by Locati, plan to already have begun redesigning workspaces. And we know if you redesign a workspace, you've got to address the air distribution, the lighting, the services that go to it. So I think that bodes well for our industry in terms of, like, we've talked about it many times before, where the retrofit and refurbishment market will really gain momentum. If the construction market goes down, that could actually fill the void.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to bring on John Turner onto the stage, onto the virtual stage. John is VP of Innovation or Innovation Technology at Gaffcon. Welcome to the group, John. You're new to this group, obviously, and so if I can possibly ask you to introduce yourself and maybe a brief introduction about Gaffcon. You present yourself as a representative of building owners, and that will be an interesting sort of perspective for us to understand a bit more. And then we really want to get your perspective on your journey into the digital twin. It's a big part of what Gaffcon is doing, and you and I have talked quite frequently on the Digital Twin Consortium. But introduce yourself, Gaffcon, and the journey to digital twin, and how that is going to improve buildings. So,
thanks, Anton. Thanks, everyone else. Thank you for inviting me. So, just a little introduction. I've been involved in the world of construction from an owner's perspective for a long time. I actually started off in the North Sea offshore industry back in the 80s, and very quickly realized that construction was not utilizing very much technology. I got involved in a move where the offshore operators wanted to reconstruct their platforms for what they called the second generation of oil and gas extraction, but they couldn't put people offshore because they didn't have enough beds. They couldn't use existing construction techniques because they didn't have enough space. They had to decommission, but they still had to keep the oil pumping. So they started to use a lot of prefabrication, the early days of what was then the 3D plant design systems, and very innovative contracting vehicles. And now, 30 years later, we seem to be going through exactly the same journey again, where rather than calling things plant design systems, we call them BIM. The technology is a little different because rather than being data-driven, it's very much vision-driven. But now we're starting to also get into some interesting delivery techniques like integrated project delivery. So in between my time in the offshore industry and the last 8 or so years working with owners in more conventional construction, mainly building, I was also involved in transformational uses of technology. And what I learned from that was that the change that we're going through, and you've mentioned McKinsey. McKinsey is really pointing out the fact that the construction industry is probably one of the least digitized industries in the world. I think only agriculture is maybe slightly worse, and now we have tractors driving themselves across fields. So we're not well digitized. There's a lot of examples of how to digitize, but the middle part of my career was all about using technology to transform organizations. And this is what really attracts me to where we are within, I use the word construction guardedly because I think we have to drop the word construction and start to talk about digital building life cycle now. And we have to start talking about not only delivering physical buildings, but also delivering virtual buildings, and not really focusing so much on the building as focusing on why people are using that building, whether it be for manufacturing, whether it be to use that building to attract the best employees, and certainly to make sure the environment of that building is going to be the most conducive to get the most productivity from the employees. So my focus for the last 8 years has been working with owners, very large owners who are wanting to see how they can transform their perspective, not just on design and construction, but to start to get into this digital building life cycle, which will enable a digital twin approach. And the last year or so, I've been very heavily involved within the Digital Twin Consortium. I'm co-chair of the infrastructure group, which focuses both on horizontal and vertical infrastructure. And I believe we're in the start of a very interesting journey. I'll stop there and see if you have any specific comments or questions.
I'll open it up to the team.
I'd like to know a little bit more, John, about Gaffcon. Is Gaffcon as a company? I assume you're one of many. I just don't have a feel for where you're located and how extensive your operation is.
Okay, so Gaffcon started off as a regional project management, construction management organization, Southern California based.
Okay.
And very much supporting mainly public clients within the public space, very large educational programs or other public programs, probably with bond money, where we needed to provide a lot of transparency and visibility into how that money was being spent, because it was public money. And we've really evolved from a focus on what we call project management information systems, which provide that visibility into costs and schedule and the more, what I call the more conventional focuses on the digital building lifecycle, to starting to integrate BIM related technologies, and to start to introduce a focus not so much on BIM for visualization, for the visual aspects, the 2D and 3D, but to really start to leverage BIM for the information and for its connectivity to all the other forms of data within the digital building lifecycle. So having started off really with a regional focus, we've built what we're now calling Gaffcon Digital into an organization. It's a virtual organization, and in the world of COVID, it's stood us very well, but a virtual organization which has operations right around the world at the moment.
So BIM's been around for a while now, and what if you were to summarize what the 2 or 3 key benefits of it are in terms of this journey of the digital building? How do you describe that to a building owner? Why they should care?
Well, I first of all start by saying BIM is a technology. It's not a process.
Right.
And I then asked them, if you had told me to go out and buy you a car, what would you expect me to deliver? And they say, well, we have to specify what type of car. Do we want a certain color or a certain size or a certain speed or a certain capacity, a certain price range? And I said, I would say using BIM is very similar to specifying a car. You can do all sorts of things with BIM. And so it's very, very important to start off with. I think I normally explain BIM has gone through really 3 main life cycles. So when BIM was first released into the market, it was doing no more than making architects more efficient in producing drawings faster. And then the second major use of BIM has been to largely help general contractors to coordinate and to avoid clashes in the field. And that can be done purely with a visual perspective. They don't have to use much in terms of the eye, the information within BIM. But the third major use then is to start to emphasize BIM as being a data model around which all the other data can be linked within the digital building life cycle. So we can link it back to schedule, to cost, to asset, to simulations. But even inside of BIM itself, BIM has still, to give you an example, in terms of electrical equipment, BIM in terms of electrical discipline normally only models down to the electrical panel. It doesn't model what's in the electrical panel. And that means 70% of the equipment in the building is not modeled in BIM. So even using BIM as a technique has to change. And so what we've been doing is to pioneer ways in which we can very closely integrate the 2D, the more paper aspects of it, back into intelligent 2D, link it to the 3D world, link it to the world of simulation. So those of you who are familiar with building security will be familiar with the riser diagrams, which are generally just dumb diagrams. They can be converted into intelligent diagrams through the use of 2D objects. Those objects can also be related to 3D objects, say a camera. You can have an icon for a camera in 2D, but you can also have a model for the camera in 3D. And then if you take it to the next level, you can actually simulate back in the BIM environment as to what that camera is actually going to see in the real world. So we can start to build out the full digital representation of this world before we start to get into the detail of the design and the construction related drawings.
John, this is Jim Lee. Many years ago, maybe 5+ years ago, we had a series of discussions with folks in the industry foundation class, BIM model world. And there was not enough interest at that time to add the data definitions that we need for the industry. And our industry has actually gone ahead and worked for many years assembling those data definitions, as can be embodied by standards such as Haystack, BACnet, etc. So the question I have for you is, how can we take all of that work that we've already done and lever that back into those data definitions so that we don't find ourselves reinventing a separate world when we've actually done a lot of that work already?
Very, very good question, because I'm often asked, why I don't participate more within standards boards. And the answer I normally give is, we already have a lot of very good standards available. Now's the time not to invent more standards. Now's the time to start using what we have. So in a lot of cases, the owner needs to interpret those standards in a way that is more applicable with their overall use cases. I always say, start a project with the end in mind. So if you start with the end in mind, you know what use cases you're trying to solve for, what problems that you're trying to solve for, then you can start to select from the standards that are already available and put together a standards-based approach. We generally have a 5-step process that we use with our owners. Step number 1 is to make sure that those basic standards are in place around naming standards, data definitions, and everything else which is important so that it can be leveraged right the way through. However, there are new standards starting to come into place around certain of the technologies. And this is a game where the Digital Twin Consortium is starting to help, because we don't necessarily need to go through something like IFC in order to get directly into the world of digital twin. We can actually go directly from BIM, and we can start to attribute the BIM in a way that links with external data sources, which could be standardized sources coming from different vendors. And then we can pull all that information together in what's called now the digital twin definition language, which leads into products like Azure Digital Twin. So there are other standards like the real estate core ontology, which can start to pull together things, because standards like Haystack are probably more focused on the building automation systems rather than on the general use of a digital twin. But maybe to clarify that, I ought to specify that in terms of a digital twin approach, we normally look at 8 main focuses. So the first focus is the focus on the 2D and the 3D spaces, whether there's a 2D representation or a 3D representation of the space, because owners are more interested in the spaces than they are in the fabric of the building. However, they still need to understand the assets, which is the second main perspective. The third main perspective is on documentation. And in a lot of cases in our current world, that documentation is entirely unstructured. It's paper-based documentation, which maybe has been converted into PDFs, but it's almost impossible to access easily. So we have to then start to convert that data to structured data and align it with the asset. And once we can start to do that, whether it's the virtual asset in the planning design transformed into the physical asset, then we have a way to start to align the cost and to start to capture that cost at each stage within the process. So those 4 steps are really what we need to do to capture from a new building or to capture data from an existing building. But then the other 4 steps are what we're going to do with the data. So there's been a big focus on Internet of Things and sensor technology. A lot of that's come from Brick and Haystack, where there's been a focus around building automation systems. But sensors are more than just the temperature and the humidity and the gas sensors, carbon dioxide sensors. They're also security sensors. And we're now starting to build out an array of sensors that will start to detect COVID-related activities as well. And this really speaks to the fact that as well as Internet of Things, we also have the Internet of Actions. So how are people actually consuming the building? How do they enter the building? Which doors do they use? Where do they park? How do different departments interrelate to one another? Do they actually have to go through the elevator continuously, or can we now start to bring the departments together to minimize the travel time between departments and maximize the interactivity between them? And then we've got to focus on the organizational systems. Quick example, a very simple example would be the interaction with something like Microsoft Outlook, which can book conference rooms, but those conference rooms are going to be heated or cooled through the building automation system. The conference rooms are going to be occupied through the people interacting with the building. So if we know how people are booking the conference rooms, how they're interacting with them, how we're using the energy to heat or cool them, then we can start to optimize the entire use of the building. And this starts to focus on sustainability goals for large owners. To do that, we have to have realizations across these multiple data sets. We have to be able to make sure those data sets can be used cohesively and we can correlate them. And that starts to allow techniques like artificial intelligence to start to see how our buildings are actually being used by the employees, how they're being aligned with the way they're being maintained or the way they're being operated, they're being specified, how the organizations are slotted into those buildings. And that starts to see what we're doing well from an owner perspective and what we're not doing well. So that's how we're trying to pull together the whole aspect of the digital twin. But going back to your question, how do standards operate within all of that? It depends what you want to end up with, whether we need to leverage which standards at what time. But generally, I feel there are enough standards out there now that we don't need to invent any new standards.
Thank you.
John, a question for you. Previously, there's been a lot of confusion between BIM and digital twins. and really they are two different things, but do you actually feel that the combination of the two are essential as we move forward?
I think the first perspective is, I think a lot of people think that the digital twin is no more than the visual representation of a building. And to a certain extent, the conventional use of BIM is no more than a visual representation of the virtual building. So I think the big thing that's missing to link the two is a focus on the data and the information that can be derived from that data through context. BIM is a great way of providing the spatial context to the data that's created from sensors of various sorts, and it can put everything back into context very, very quickly. I think BIM is absolutely fundamental, but I don't think BIM as a technology is being used correctly. I always talk about a BIM-centric approach, not a BIM approach, because BIM will never, ever capture all the data that's necessary for a digital twin. And if BIM is used in its conventional manner, purely from a visual perspective, it will never, ever achieve what it needs to achieve to enable a digital twin. But they are very connected.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
John, I think you had a question, John.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask, along the lines of the helping owners look at their digital building life cycle, right? One of the things we've talked about is the wide range of maturity, understanding, comprehension of these issues. So can you talk a little bit about when you talk to customers and try to convey that concept to them, that that's how they need to look at their design and construction process? Does that qualify out 90% of your potential customers, or what do you experience when you try to take people down that very different road for how they're going to look at their construction process?
That's a very, very good question, because I believe that the biggest problem we have, if we talk about construction, it's really planning, design, construction. We very rarely talk about procurement, and then we get into the operations and maintenance aspects, which are very much around the fabric of the building. We don't so much talk about space management and other planning aspects. And that's really because I believe that the whole world of buildings is so siloed. And one of the biggest issues is, how do we start to break down those silos? Sometimes I talk about a building program as being an Englishman, a Frenchman, and an Italian coming together, and you say, build me the building. Unfortunately, they don't speak the same language. And even if you taught them all the same language, they wouldn't have the same comprehension. So the big issue with dealing with owners at the moment is one of what I would call organizational change management. How do we start to get them to think differently into this digital building life cycle? Organizational change management generally teach you, imagine the whole market is a circle. You can take a 10% segment of that circle out, and they are the anchors. They will never, ever change their perspective. And you can go to the other side and you can take another 10% segment and say, those are the change agents. They are the people who really want to change, but don't necessarily know how to change. Our focus at the moment, because this is an evolving market, is we only want to align with 1% of those 10% of the change agents. The people who really have a need to change. There's a very sound business case for them to change. And we want to enable them to change and to show what can be done, because change management theory will tell you that whoever is in the ascendancy, the anchors or the change agents, will actually take the 80% of the market with them. We absolutely believe at the moment that our world is looking more to the anchors rather than looking to the change agents. And so we want to align very, very closely with those companies, and generally the owner operators. I sometimes call them serial builders. the people, organizations building the very similar things over and over again, where we can start to apply more manufacturing focus rather than the construction focus. So if you think of the world of a data center is pretty much the same wherever you build it. There's some localization required, but you can start to assemble a data center rather than construct a data center. People sometimes then say, well, what about an office building? I'm saying, well, even in an office building, there are a lot of things which are absolutely the same. If you go into a high rise, every single kitchen, every single electrical room is going to be the same on each floor. So look for the commonality in the design, build once, apply many times, and then we can start to get efficiencies which the manufacturing sector has realized over and over again through lean construction or lean manufacturing techniques, that if they can identify and eliminate the 7 wastes, then suddenly the whole process becomes very much more effective. So, John, a difficult question. We don't want to deal with the whole market at the moment. We just want to deal with those owners who really want to change but don't know how to.
So John Turner, a couple questions for you. Great information that you're providing. Thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the things that I see, there seems, when you talk digital twins, that there still seems to be a struggle. Is the digital twin for the owner? Is it for the facility management people? Where's IT fit? Is it for the system integrator? Is it for the OT people? For us in our industry, we have to deal with all those types and probably more that I've kind of left out. So what's your thought on this? Who's the digital twin specifically for? And if you define it as one, what's your thoughts about what's the different value propositions for these other people that need to be part of this process?
Very good question, Mark. And I'd answer it by first of all saying there's no such thing as a digital twin. And I'm a great proponent of the fact that as we go through, say, in a new building, there's going to be multiple digital twins. So there's probably going to be a digital twin of requirements, which will then be used maybe to start to simulate the functionality of a building so they can better inform the design. There's probably going to be a design BIM, which is more starting to build out the digital twin within the design process. We could simulate things like traffic flows in and to a building, which is more the simulation in the planning. Construction BIM is often very different from a design BIM. We might have data which is pulled from the design BIM into a procurement digital twin, which will start to inform the long lead items for procurement, what the owner wants to procure as opposed to what the contractor procures. And even getting into the world of operations and maintenance, there will be completely separate digital twins. Some of our clients, larger clients, say in power, actually run a digital twin of large parts of their equipment, say a generator or a large compressor unit. They all have digital twins in their own rights, and they are used to monitor the functionality of those very large pieces of equipment. And they don't necessarily tie back at the moment to the digital twin of the building or the digital twin of the organization. Because the big focus, which has been picked up recently by the Digital Twin Consortium, is that a digital twin is not just a link between the physical and the virtual. It's actually a link back to the processes which are active within the physical. So we can start to simulate a lot more than just the mechanical system or a building automation system. So in my belief, digital twins operate at different stages within the building life cycle and are probably going to be constructed very differently, because to me, a digital twin is no more than a collection of use cases, which are all designed to solve a particular problem or provide a particular benefit to an owner. That benefit has to derive from an owner, because only an owner can pull together this process. It can't be pulled together by an architect or a general contractor. They have to participate in it. But in participating in that process, they will derive benefit as well.
So follow-up question real quick. I feel like a reporter at the White House is this. Do you believe that, what's your thought on, should the industry offer this as a built service or more as a service? Where do you think the quicker traction will be done, as built or as a service?
My belief is that we will find that every building will have its own building operating system very soon. So what we'll find is there's very little difference between a physical building and that virtual building, which is so closely associated with that physical building that it's just integrated. Now, in terms of how we're going to deliver that, it's a lot easier at the moment to deliver it from a new building, which will be as some sort of integration service. So we see ourselves as more a digital twin integrator, because the critical role in tying all these digital twins together is going to be to enable what we call a digital thread. It's how do we make sure through a standards-based approach and through the management of that flow of data from one stage to another, we're going to make sure that there's no waste within that. The last thing we want is digital waste at the end of the day. If you ask a general contractor how much of the data that is provided by an architect that they will actually use, they will say quite often very little. And so our existing process creates a tremendous amount of waste. If we do no more than eliminate that waste, we will, I think, eliminate at least 10% of the cost of providing a building. The biggest market, though, is in existing buildings. So we have to find a way to retrofit existing buildings back into exactly the same process as we would then start to enable for new buildings. That's going to be more of a challenge, because generally, with our work, it's shown that about 60% of the documentation for a building is lost within the construction process. And the work we're doing with insurance companies has shown that if a building is sold, then up to 90% of the documentation necessary is going to be lost. It makes it very difficult to capture that information, to bring it back into a digital twin, particularly as a lot of this data is covered up by walls. So we have to find ways to capture that information somehow, and maybe it's done through tenant improvement or retrofit or renovation. It's not done for a whole building. It's done maybe floor by floor and build it out over the building life cycle. Because one thing that's certainly is going to be true, the original use of that building is not going to be the final use of that building. So we have opportunities to not just capture existing buildings in one pass, but to capture them sequentially as they go through their various transformation.
Hey, John, on that challenge that you just said about existing buildings and collecting data from the existing buildings. So one of my perspectives of digital twins is it's a lot like generating a picture, right? I mean, if I only have 2 data points of a pump, a chiller, or whatever, it's a very granular, pixelated, gray, picture of that. The more data that I can collect, obviously, the sharper the image comes, the sharper the picture of what it is that I've got. And so the challenge I've always had with digital twin, the 2 challenges I had with digital twin is, how do you incentivize the end user to want to start collecting that data? And how do you not overwhelm him with the task, right, and ahead of him, especially when 80–90% of the documentation is missing.
That's probably the $64,000 question at the moment. And I don't think we have all the solutions in place for existing buildings. We can certainly capture a lot of information. We can certainly capture the building geometry very easily through 360 camera views or through laser scanning some sort. The big question is, how do we capture the data which is required? Now, a lot of that data, if people have a CMMS, computerized maintenance management system, there's a lot of data in that. However, the big issue is that's generally asset data, doesn't necessarily link that data together in systems, which are required for the ability to simulate and monitor systems. So there's a lot of manual effort to pull together all of that data at the moment, and it can be very expensive. And that's why we advocate at this stage, not necessarily deciding to convert a building to a digital twin in its totality, but to go through that with a tenant improvement, retrofit, or revamp project. And so then you're probably taking the walls down, you're changing the systems, you have the ability to then build it up as though it's a small greenfield project.
John, one of the things that this group has discussed over the past few months is the challenges in the procurement process, because the procurement sort of process typically doesn't know where to put something like smart systems and analytics, because there's no line item for that. Can you speak to how this sort of digital twin thinking could actually help that?
Yeah, that's again a very interesting question. I think there are maybe, Anto, there's two aspects of procurement. One is the fact that we need to bring in the equipment providers, the vendors, more into the process of the digital building lifecycle. And an example I would give you is, hazard a guess at how much owners pay for the submittals process and how much value is created by a submittals process. Now, when you think of what submittals is, it's the architect has designed something as a concept almost. They provided specifications. They provided that design intent, but then the general contractor, through their trade partners, has to turn that design intent into something that's real. And the only way they can do that is to have this backwards and forwards between the teams to say, well, you specified a certain type of chiller. This is what we would suggest, but maybe it doesn't meet all your requirements. Or you've given us this space, we can't fill the device we need is too big to go into this space. I've heard lots of discussions of, the engineers have maybe specified mechanical systems to ducting to run through a particular roof space, but hasn't realized that the structural engineers are filling it up with all sorts of innovative trusses. And so it becomes too expensive to do clean run-throughs in the roof space. So there's a lot of aspects to how do we change the way the whole process is really addressed, because to me the worst possible thing that we have within our industry at the moment is this thing that's called design intent. If I could do two things, I sometimes ask my clients, if I was your fairy godfather and I was able to give you 3 wishes, what would they be? Well, my first wish would be design for design's sake, so that it's something that is useful for a general contractor and the trade partners to use. Eliminate design intent. It has to be a proper design that can be taken directly into the construction process. The second aspect of that would be eliminate paper from the process. Let's go to structured data. Now, if we go to structured data and we start to specify our equipment in BIM, but to tie it back to a vendor, then all that data that we currently put into submittals can be pulled together in structured data right the way into the process. And so we start to eliminate a lot of what I would call are the wastes from a lean perspective that the owner is having to pay a lot of money for. And obviously general contractors are making a lot of profit from managing this specification submittals process. But ultimately, we could really short circuit that whole process, as well as making sure that the operations and maintenance team had all the specifications they needed around their systems from a very early stage in design. We've heard from some of our owners that say it costs them somewhere between 3 and 5% of construction to capture and convert the data so that they can start to operate that building efficiently. Now, all of this, if we go into a total digital workflow, which involves the procurement team, involves the vendors, then we can start to eliminate, I think, a huge amount of waste that we have in our conventional process.
Jim, you're the one getting back to procurement for a moment. Does that help at all from a procurement perspective?
I think it's a step in the right direction, but fundamentally, I think that it's where procurement on the operating side of a building meets the process today. So, a lot of the operational benefit of analytics in buildings is from the existing building stock. And, the question is, if we do not have access to new construction money, which is what John Turner is talking about, is there, what's the process? To me, the component that's broken is that there's a divide between the construction component of the building and the operating component. Maybe John could speak to that.
Absolutely, totally agree with you that there is a very big, it's a chasm. And I think it's something we have to do to bridge the world of construction, the world of operations. Considering from an owner's perspective, according to NIST, about 85% of the cost of operating that building is in the life cycle, not in the design and construction. So we have to bridge that gap. But if we look at some of the problems that we currently encounter with our existing owners, one of the big issues is that they're not able to interrogate each of their buildings to find out how the equipment is necessarily performing, because they don't even have standardized naming conventions to call a particular class of pump the same thing in all their buildings. And this is largely because that pump has been delivered to them by a general contractor using their own designations. So even when we get into some of the larger owners we work for, they might have buildings scattered all over North America. They might say they want to go to a particular type of pump or one of 4 vendors' pumps because it makes sense in terms of training people on how to maintain them and carrying spare parts. But if you ask them to go into their CMMS system and tell them how many pumps they have in each of their regions, they probably can't tell you that because they are looking at managing buildings individually. They're not managing buildings as part of a portfolio with current data standards. So
no, I agree completely. Those of us who are in the analytics business in this space have basically over the past 20 years had to come up with techniques to derive a lot of these components of information from the building itself.
Yeah.
And it turns out that as an industry, we have figured out how to back derive a lot of that operating data to have meaningful analytic value propositions.
Yeah.
Would it be nirvana to have that stuff collected in a database form and passed down as it should be? Absolutely. But as you know, once again, for that 5 million commercial building stock in the United States that's already built, it's a big lift to get that data input. So this method of back deriving what those things are from information that's at hand is going to be, what we continue to do.
Absolutely.
The question is how do we bring those two things together and take advantage of what digital twin and BIM could offer going forward?
Yeah.
If I could jump in here a second, because I've been reading the chat, which has been helpful as people are listening. And I have this quote from Mark Cuban, and of course he owns the Dallas Mag. He owns a lot of arenas, and he also is a very high tech guy. And I captured this clip for a Haystack magazine. He says, "If I was a kid starting now, I'd be going business to business with a service like labeling for AI." And I think about, we've got Stacks and Jewel here on the chat. They're training people, trying to train the next generation. We have Chad Rich in here talking about, we really need IT, the software people to take a leadership stand here. And that Mark Cuban idea, to me, is like really having some sort of cruise of people that are financially incentivized to go in and given the right tool set to do labeling for AI. Yes, I think Mark Cuban, just like you said, John, wants to know what's his best pump,
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to not want to throw people at it. We want to throw technology at it. So there's a lot can be done in terms of machine vision, that once we actually have images of certain things, we can actually train the software to recognize what those things are, because they're not looking at, they know it's a pump, and they know that there's a choice of a certain number of pumps because of the information that's available. So there's a lot of technology-based solutions using machine vision, which I think are going to come to our rescue very soon.
I mean, it won't be total automation. You're still going to need some people.
Yeah, we'll still need people.
The idea of this labeling for AI, going into these old structures and buildings and figuring, I don't know what this crew of people would be equipped with, but that ability to come away with a structured database.
Yeah, what we're trying to avoid though is people having to walk through the systems in the buildings. We'd much rather capture that information using visual techniques. We can do that very easily now using laser scanning or 360 cameras, even in confined spaces. And then we can bring that back to people working remotely and building up these pictures of what the equipment is. It's a lot more cost effective.
So we're at the top of the hour. We need to start to wrap up. John, maybe give the last word to you, sort of wrap this up. I don't know if by the questions you've been asked, whether you get a sense of what we're trying to do. I'd love to get you.
I would say there's no silver bullet in this at the moment. This is going to be a very interesting progression over the next few years. But for the first time in my career, certainly the technology is available to make this work within certain buildings, particularly for new buildings. And I think we're going to see a very rapid change within the perspective as we digitize what has been our traditional design and construction process. As we start to talk about the integrated digital building life cycle, it will start to change the way that we do things within this industry.
That's a great wrap up, and I just read on the chat, we need to talk more about BIM and digital twins. We need more experts like you. I think it's amazing.
I could talk about it all day and all night, but people would probably get very tired.
Yeah, maybe. So thank you very much, John, for joining us, and thanks everybody for being here. We will put this on video on YouTube by morning time, and next week, just as a reminder, is the start of March. We will be changing the subject to sustainability, which should be an interesting range of sessions. We're going to start by talking about grid reliability. Does that ring a bell, Anno?
Very much, especially here in Texas. So,
all right. So with that, thank you thank you, everybody. Bye bye. Have a great week.
Thanks for the invitation. Bye.
Thanks, Joe. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.